We've had an electronic monitoring system on all of our inpatient beds for over 2 years now. Some of them have been in for 3 years. Because of the time it takes to do this kind of validation, it's really worth it because you just will not get the buy-in from people if you can't prove to them that it really is as accurate as you say it is. And you have to prove it to yourself. But once you've done that time, then you know you have what you need and you can really start to make some inroads. Believability is what we operate, that's the currency on which we do anything that we do in infection control. If people don't believe that scrubbing the hub is going to reduce the risk of CLABSI for a patient, they're not going to scrub the hub. If they don't believe that your numbers for hand hygiene are accurate, they're not going to clean their hands more. They're still going to think that they're doing it just as much as they need to. The plan path is the first key piece to not just making sure that the system is working properly, but that everyone understands how it's working. You want to test each component of the electronic system in order in a testing environment. So basically, we would have one practitioner use the Purell outside of room 1, walk into room 1, use the Purell inside room 1, walk out of room 1, use the next Purell dispenser, go into room 2, use the Purell in there, walk out of room 2. It doesn't take very long to go through the motions of walking down a unit and doing this. But in the end, then you can look at the raw data and make sure that everything you thought you were doing was captured. Because if one of the sensors isn't picking up an entry or an exit, or if you have a problem where one of the dispensers isn't really monitoring, usually it's a quick fix problem where we just need to adjust the sensor or we needed to, sort of plug something in or unplug something and move it to a different plug. But it's a really quick fix to make sure that everything's really working the way that you think it's supposed to after the vendor's done with their piece. The next step is the behavioral monitoring. And this is the most important one of all. Because when you walk into a room deliberately with an average height person, not rushing into an emergency, not wavering in the doorway, not carrying a bunch of stuff just in and out, that's only one piece of what actually happens in a hospital. In real life, people are crossing the threshold together. One's going out, one's coming in. People are dragging a computer behind them as they go into the room. If it's a code, a bunch of people will rush in together. Sometimes they'll stop in the doorway, realize they forgot something, leave, come back. Sometimes they just peek their head in to see if the patient's okay. And you have to decide if you really want those things captured or not. And then you have to look at what happens when people do those everyday behaviors in your hospital. The way that we do that from a sort of pragmatic standpoint is we asked a light duty nurse or an infection control practitioner or anyone we can find, a student, to sit outside of 2 rooms and basically write down one piece of paper for each room and write down, Purell used 943 or entered room 944. 2 people entered 947. 1 person exited 943 or pulled curtain at 947, just to see if any of these things would show up in the data the way we expected them to. If we found that pulling the curtain was counting as an entry or an exit, we'd want to fix the way the sensor was oriented. If we found that we had regularly had 2 people walking in, one after the other, not too close together, but it was only counting them once, we need to turn down the gain on the activity counter. So it depends on what kind of system you have, but you can figure out ways to make sure that it's working optimally so that what you think is an entry is counting as an entry, and what you think is a dispenser or a dispensing is a dispensing. And you want to make sure that you have 90% or 85% or better accuracy on each of those things. The most important thing is to make sure that the data that you're getting are accurate. I mean, if you choose to go with an electronic monitoring system, you're doing so because you know that the observation that you've been doing isn't good enough to tell you what you need to know to change behavior. And if you're going to switch to a new electronic monitoring system, it's worth taking the time to make sure that it's correct.